to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
Hello, city.
You just talking to the city?
Just
Got
the
it.
city
Got
today.
it. And we have a guest with us today, Krista Godfrey. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good morning.
Krista, you're joining us today because you're a licensed nutritionist and eating disorder specialist. And we're kind of continuing on this series of health in the new year and how we view our bodies, how we view our relationship with food. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, help our listeners understand what a nutritionist does if they're not familiar.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and also a licensed medical nutrition therapist in Nebraska.
Okay.
There's lots of different roles a dietitian can hold, and there's clinical roles like in a hospital or in a long-term care facility, food management kind of roles in food service in a hospital again or a school system. There's community nutrition roles, so that's more education and grant-based kind of projects, and then there's outpatient clinical nutrition, and that's what I do. Been a dietitian for over 12 years. And started my career in long-term care, which was short-lived because I really wanted to work with children and adolescents. So as soon as I got the job, I moved up to Omaha to work at Children's Hospital, where I was for about 10 years, and primarily working with eating disorders and at the time cystic fibrosis and kind of all general outpatient nutrition concerns. Did some helping out on the med-surg floors and just lots of different conditions. But I kind of found my passion working with eating disorders in their partial eating disorder program. And so it's kind of like a day program. You might have heard about that a little bit last week on the podcast. And then also doing outpatient nutrition counseling with individuals with eating disorders.
Okay.
And then more recently, the last 6 years or so, I started my own practice, Life Cycle Nutrition, and I'm seeing individuals privately for nutrition counseling.
So help us understand the difference between a nutritionist and a dietitian. I think I may have used those interchangeably, but help us understand. What's the difference?
Oh,
and
yes.
what do you consider yourself?
Yeah, so a nutritionist, there's really no regulations on what's
So
labeled.
I could be a nutritionist.
You could be. You
Okay,
could take a
yeah.
course in nutrition and,
Okay.
and be, call yourself a nutritionist, which
All right, great.
I think a lot of people do consider themselves, experts in nutrition or like knowledgeable at least, and they can claim to be nutritionist. Dietitian, there's like a graduate level like coursework, a didactic program, and then dietitians now need a master's degree, so there's continued education there.
So when I'm scrolling through TikTok, if I hear someone say they're a nutritionist, I should keep scrolling. But if
Yeah.
they say they're a dietitian,
That means
then
nothing.
I
Yeah.
should maybe pay attention.
Yes,
Okay,
so
got it.
dietitians, they have a 4-year degree and then a master's degree, and then also it's almost a 2-year internship
Okay.
where they complete a certain amount of hours in curriculum, and then they also have to do continuing education so that we keep up on the latest research and knowledge when it comes to nutrition. So definitely the most credible sources when it comes to nutrition information, and I would say out of all medical professionals, we have the most, it's our specialty. So sometimes, different providers will say something. I would recommend going to a dietitian for nutrition information. So
Great. That's good.
Yeah.
Good clarification.
It's kind of like a therapist and counselor, and in your world, it's you gotta continue that.
Psychologist,
Yeah.
psychiatrist, sorry.
Yeah, yes, especially, and I'm assuming you also have to, like a state license where it's like you have to do that continuing education. And I love that too, because it's like there's so much research and things that are happening in our fields where it's so helpful to have that information or new research that's coming out.
Yeah.
Where does your passion come from for this, and specifically kids, like as you were like picking your career?
Oh, yeah. That's a great question. I feel like, so kind of dating back just to, I guess, my childhood, I came from a kind of health-focused family. So, health, nutrition was, something that was, I guess, semi a focus. So that was kind of an interest just instilled in me, I guess, as growing up. And then, I had a lot of interest in high school. So I was like trying to narrow down what should I go to. I felt so much pressure to pick a degree. And I ended up just going, okay, how about like nutrition? I was really interested at it at the time, and for different reasons. so then I pursued that, and I kind of feel like, honestly, God led me to this, to work with eating disorders. It just, it kind of fell into place, and I guess I'd say it was an interest of mine, but there were not opportunities for me to like pursue that, or even think that I like had the qualifications to like apply for a job in an eating disorder program. But I was applying for a job at Children's, and I applied for a different position as a part-time, but I wanted a full-time position, and the eating disorder program had a part-time position. And so they're like, how about you do both of these part-time roles and make it a full-time? And I was like, wow.
Yes.
I didn't even think I was qualified to apply for that job, and it just fell into place, and then that was history. So yeah, it was great.
That's great. Is there anything, before we get into more of the meat of the conversation, anything we asked you about your professional career, anything you want to share, personal career, anything? I mean, personal career. Personal isn't a career.
Life,
personal life or anything like that. You don't have to, but
Yeah.
just if you'd like to, I want to give you that opportunity.
Yeah, well, I consider my most important and biggest job, honestly, being a mom to 4. So I have a one that's about to graduate high school, a freshman, 6th grader, and 3rd grader. And so they're my number one passion. And but yes, a big part of my life is being a mom and a wife. And yeah, I feel privileged to have a role that I can help people and do what I love, and then also allows me time to be the mom I want to be. So
That's great.
yeah.
Awesome. So some people might be listening to this or see the title of the episode and go, what? How does this pertain to like Christianity, or why should Christians be thinking about food? You know, this God provides food, great, whatever. Why, let's leave it there. And I think even in my experience growing up as a kid, like it was just kind of like, nutrition was definitely not something that was discussed, talked about, even considered. It was just, what are we eating for dinner? We're doing this, we're going out to eat, we're doing whatever. It just, wasn't even in the, or we would pray and thank God for the food, but that was kind of where it stopped. You know what I mean? We didn't think about what we were putting into our bodies. So help us understand, like, where does this intersect, and why should we as believers be invested in understanding what we're eating and why it's important?
Yeah, I would love your guys' input on this too. I feel like there is a big parallel between someone's relationship with food and similar to a relationship with Christ, which I honestly didn't realize until I found my own faith. So let me tell you a little bit about that. I guess that might help. I found Christ when I was in college. And at the time, struggling with my own eating issues, mostly my relationship with food was more of rigid and kind of controlled, and this idea that there was a perfect way to eat, and I wanted to be perfect in all ways. I wanted to be worthy and good enough, and felt like I needed to do things to earn that or prove that, and had never experienced a relationship with grace and freedom. And then because of that, like my relationship with food, when I met Christ and learned of like his grace and forgiveness and ultimate freedom, because I had that relationship, it took on a whole new meaning. It was so much easier for me to apply those same principles to myself and my relationship with food, and help me to find that same freedom with food and that Christ offers me. So I see a parallel there. I don't know if that's, I certainly don't think that's the only, relationship there.
Yeah.
I think there's other ways
to
to
start.
Yeah.
Because I think if you look at 1 Corinthians and it talks about our bodies being the temple, that's kind of an easy one to point to maybe for an argument, but do we, even at this table, do we really, how do you view that statement? Is it, because if our body's a temple and something that we need to be taking care of, it's like what we put into it matters. I know, Alex, you've had thoughts on this before.
Well, I think this gets used, all the time in the health and wellness kind of world, and I get it because we're talking about our bodies being a temple of the Holy Spirit, but I don't think Paul was thinking about, caloric deficits and kale smoothies and all those kinds of things like we do in our world when he's writing this, because he's talking about sexual immorality. Like he's actually going deeper into like what we're doing with our bodies and what we're doing with our lives, and how like self-gratification and the sin of that, especially in the sexual immorality context, is a big deal. And so he's not necessarily he's not trying to say, hey, I'm a nutritionist today and you guys need to, watch what you're eating. In fact, there was a time, speaking of the grace, part where there were people that were very rigid, about their food, especially, Paul had this, incidents and Peter, where they were just very rigid, especially the Jewish culture, about their food. And then there was this vision, and God's like, I'm going to give you grace about the things that you eat. And there was a lot of reasons that they kept away from food, because a lot of hygienic reasons, especially when God was trying to preserve the people of Israel and, all those kinds of things. And you get into all the Leviticus, and there was a lot of good reason for some of that, because the non-cleanliness and how it would kill a lot of people, literally. But then God's like, hey, but I'm going to give grace. Like, you guys have been so rigid about this. And so that actually is probably more about food than this passage about our bodies being a temple of the Holy Spirit. And so, but it is that spiritual practice of maybe the aha moment of realizing my body is a gift from God, and I'm called to steward that. Like, it's a gift means it was given to me, and my job is to steward that gift. I get to do what I want. I mean, my kids, the gifts I gave them for Christmas, they can use them for what they're intended, or they could go throw them at the wall or give them to somebody else. Like, we have the opportunity to steward that gift once it's given. And so that's my little soapbox about it, maybe a little. It's
a good sermonette.
But I love kind of what you were sharing, because I think there's a difference in both. Like, Eric, you're like, yeah, we didn't really talk about food a lot growing up. And for you, you're like, it was rigid, And so that the grace there, like becoming something that's freeing, I think is a really cool thing to hear, especially for people that maybe they are quote unquote health conscious, or they really are focused on the food. I think that's the side that is missed for those who are more rigid, and think about food all the time, is that realization of, no, grace is offered here in that parallel. So I love what you shared there about that.
I want to tag on to your comment about your body being a gift, because I love that. And I think honoring your body or caring for it is a way of honestly being thankful and honoring the gift that was given. So I certainly see nutrition being a way that you can care for yourself and, again, be thankful for the gift you were given. A lot of times I use the metaphor of like a car. If you were given a car, kind of like caring for it and maintaining it is, is a way of showing you appreciate it and that kind of thing. And your body is like that vehicle through life. And so it is important to care for it, right? But in a kind, compassionate, and grace-filled way, Yeah.
You can become obsessed, like every time you get out of the car, I'm checking the oil, I'm doing, you can become obsessed pretty easily with it.
Sure.
But that maintenance is important. Otherwise, you don't ever do it, then you're going to just run the thing into the ground. Yeah. And so there's that balance. That's good.
Right.
And I do think that food, nutrition matters to God. I mean, even in my studies in I would say more recent years, one of the things that stood out to me is how many times Jesus met people's physical needs, whether he was healing them or feeding them, before he addressed their spiritual needs. So he's like, okay, let me give you some food. Or how many times he met with the disciples around a meal. And so as much as, because I grew up really rigidly too, where it's like, if you do this the wrong way, this equals shame. And so even noticing how much Jesus was like, let me give you some food, or like, you're hangry, like without saying that, but he's like, let's eat and let's talk. If we look at that through the lens of Jesus, it's like, okay, we have to address our relationship with food or how we're viewing it, so that we can see Jesus and how he views us as well in a different light.
I'm just curious, because one of the things when I talked to you on the phone before this that was kind of an aha moment for me is even the word morality when it comes to food. And so you were very intentional
Yeah.
about using the phrase our relationship with food and talking about morality and how oftentimes if we make that a moral issue, good or bad, foods are moral, then that's where it gets us in trouble. So I'd love for you to just maybe expound on that for the listeners
Yeah.
to what you mean by that and explain it way better than I just did.
Yeah. So there's a lot of ways that our culture and people adopt labels for foods. And one very common one, like healthy versus unhealthy, right? And good versus bad foods. I hear it all the time. And when you associate a label with a food, it gives this, it gives it more power, honestly. And if you're eating something bad, it gives you this idea that you're doing something bad. And so and when eating any food is not a moral thing, it's not a right or wrong or a good or bad thing.
Even
right?
the hot dogs on the roller at the gas station.
Those are all
And yes, all foods fit.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there can give if you label foods and then you like eat those foods and you identify as being bad or feeling bad, it can cause that sense of shame.
Yeah.
When again, eating is meant to be a joyful experience and it's a gift. So I don't know if that answered
Yeah.
the question, but
I think that is good because I mean, for me in my personal life, like as I've kind of gone on various diets over the years and tried different things, it's like the thing that's helped me the most is to stop associating foods with bad or good and just going, okay, yeah, like moderation or I can eat that. And it's not because a lot of times I would go, I'm eating only healthy things or what I deemed healthy. And then the moment I ate something unhealthy, I'm like, oh, I failed. Like, oh, this was bad. I messed up. I might as well quit. I might as well not even try. Like, you know,
Right.
and so you start to, when you have those associations, the problem I've found is it's just so hard to break those associations. If you've lived with that, it's just this mental barrier that it's sometimes almost impossible to get over. So,
right. And I do a lot of work with my clients on kind of identifying where those labels came from and then kind of looking through the science and like a label is not good or bad is not a scientific term.
Yeah.
It's a judgment. Like, so where is that judgment coming from? What does that really mean that food is bad? And kind of like digging into what's underneath it to help them and then do the education as far as nutrition. What does science say can help break those labels.
And that's where I think in the Bible, that's where I think people put the morality grid on it. Like I was sharing that the vision Peter had where like literally in the Old Testament, there was good and bad food, you know? And so then we kind of adopt that in our own world. And that good and bad food was, like I said, not for necessarily the religious reasons, but then we kind of insert that in our own world and create it to be a moral issue. When again, God's like, no, but you missed the point and I'm trying to give you freedom in it. And so that's why I love that parallel, but I can see how we as Christians sometimes adopt or inherit that mindset, especially if we're reading scripture, because we've seen maybe that narrative inside of it. So yeah, that's great.
Let's shift gears a little bit here and talk about genetics and the role that our family plays in our body types and how we view ourselves. So if you could maybe even give us some insight on how genetics influence our body types, our metabolism, and even our relationships with food. What does that look like?
So genetics have a huge role, right? And in fact, when it comes to body shape and size, 80% is attributed to genetics. So as far as what a person can influence in their shape of their body or the size of their body is minimal, right? So in other words, a person's body shape and size is not a reflection of their choices for the majority. But when it comes to genetics, like it's natural within a family system to have people of different eye colors, people with different hair colors, people of different heights, and that's well accepted, right? The same thing goes for body sizes, right? Body disposition or body composition, and different things. So
and when you say that, are you talking about like fat versus muscle, or is it? Are you talking about it more broadly?
Well, yes. So a lot of things go into a person's weight, I guess. So it can be certainly fluid status, body fat percent, lean body mass, bone density, bone structure.
So if I say I'm big bone, that's a valid.
Big bone. Yeah, there are different frame sizes. We call them frame sizes, but like, yeah.
It was always the thing you heard like the moms say. Well, then they're big boned, you know. So.
Just larger frames.
Yeah,
which is lovely. So I think it's important. I think in our culture we seem to identify body shapes like as there being one that's superior to others, or like certain are better, and I don't know where that idea. Well, I mean, you can trace that idea back to different origins, but that's not valid. I guess I'm just going to say that's not accurate. Just like there's not a better hair color than another, or eye color or height. There are differences, and I feel like that's important for people to embrace and acknowledge and accept that there's going to be people of different body shapes and sizes. It's, and they're not inferior to any other body shape or size, but
that's helpful.
Okay, for going back to Eric's comment of just like the big boned, or just like these labels that we've had on body types or genetics, right? Husky. I'm sure we could think of other ones too. Those are labels that we kind of take, and even if we're talking about like, oh, our genetics is like our family is just like this size, is that something that is okay to interact with without having like the science or like doing some kind of like metabolic screening or something like that? Like, can we interact with that information? And like, does that make sense of just like thinking about our genetics? Like, can I just say like, oh, my family's
larger framed or something? I think it's fair to acknowledge. I don't think it's necessary or appropriate to like certainly comment on or like even draw attention to. It's like,
right.
But it's in our culture, it is drawn attention to. People's bodies are commented on, which isn't appropriate.
Well, and I think part of the challenge there is that people judge others based on their appearance. So if that's the case, and what I'm hearing you say is, a lot of that appearance is due to genetics and metabolism, things like that may be out of that person's control. I mean, how do we even as a culture kind of get past that then? Because I just feel like it's much easier to just go, oh, they're unhealthy. I can just look at them and see that they're unhealthy, right? Because I can judge because I see with my eyes that they're bigger or whatever that may be. So how do we kind of move past that and realize and accept that, no, that's not necessarily the case?
Yeah, I feel like I'm so glad you brought this up because this is one thing I really wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
I just got to say, health and weight is not directly related. So you can't look at someone and know if they're healthy or not. Whatever, large body, small body, middle, average body, which is just misinformation. I feel like the first step is educating our culture, and it's very difficult because we live in a diet culture that's driven by, it's capitalist society. So driven by, the diet industry actually is more profitable or makes more money than our education system is like attributed to. So it's hard to compete with that. I don't know. I feel like my kind of philosophy is I can't change the world, but I can change my world. And so like I got to start with the people around me and, making sure they're informed and
And I think we talked a little bit about last week about things like The Biggest Loser and these things where you do see someone of a bigger body type completely transform their bodies into something else. And so I think we are conditioned to believe that is the best form of that body now. So
they went from bad to good.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's like, how do we?
So harmful.
So how do we? If we see that, and then anecdotally, we're going, well, that's true then, because you can change your body to look like whatever. And so, I think that even for myself, it's like some of those preconceived ideas are really hard to move past because it's like, well, if you can change your body, then you should, right? Like that's, you know what I mean? Like that, that's the health, that's being healthy. So I should change, you know what I mean? That's
so glad you brought this up too, because what is better about a smaller body than a bigger body? I think this is really important for people to realize that weight loss also in and of itself is not healthy. Like, it doesn't mean you're healthy if you're smaller. So for example, people may say to me, like, I want to lose weight to be healthier. But if you go about it in a way that's unhealthy, how is that making you healthier? You know, if you go about it by cutting all carbs or restricting so your body goes into starvation, or being very rigid and rule structured and interfering with your relationship with food and, you know, affecting social, emotional, mental health, like, is that healthy? Maybe you lost weight, but are you healthier? Like, are you even better off? So I think there's so much association between weight and health that is misplaced, misguided, like misunderstood. Weight in and of itself and weight loss in and of itself is not a marker of health, but our culture, you don't hear that. You know what I mean? I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around that.
Well, and I think in a culture that is kind of, you hear there's an obesity epidemic, which, I mean, there is probably truth to that people are overeating and they are eating in quantities foods that they shouldn't be eating in those quantities, right? And so it's like, how do we balance that? Because I also would fear that if someone heard that, they might think, oh, well, then I'm fine. Like, I that would be too much mental stress for me not to overeat this thing or overeat, you know, whatever that might be. Or how do we balance that and help people get into a place where it's like, no, yeah, you should not do anything. Like, you need to do something, but like, maybe don't go so extreme in what you're doing so that it is maintainable.
Sure,
you know?
sure. I think the truth is, when it comes to eating to nourish your body well, it's not easy. It does take intentionality. It does take effort. It takes being thoughtful, planning ahead, grocery shopping, cooking. So it takes work. You have to dedicate the time to care for yourself and make sure you're nourishing yourself. So I think it's important to recognize that. You don't have to go to the extremes that maybe dieting. Because we live in a diet culture and there's so many diets out there. It's like go on an extreme diet, or a lot of times people are like, how do you eat otherwise? Like, if I don't diet, how do I eat? And that's where, like, it's really important for people to just have that healthy relationship with food and learn how to eat in a way that nourishes their body and can be sustainable.
Yeah.
I do think with your question on, like, how do you do that? I think it starts with your relationship with food.
Yeah.
Anything that's founded on a harmful relationship can't really, or it's harder to be healthy. So
that makes sense.
and your relationship with food really does impact the foods you choose to eat and the amount you choose to eat, honestly. And so it does have a role. Yeah. So if people are thinking, like, okay, I want to do something, I want to focus on my health and, like, steward my body well, how do I do that? I would start by just maybe having guidance, or like reflecting on their relationship with food, and if they don't know where to start, seeking a dietitian that specializes in it.
Yeah.
To kind of get them on the solid foundation to be able to move forward.
That's really helpful.
I think too, before we move out of genetics and just like what our bodies look like, because that has been such a focus of our culture over decades, how do we begin to change, and some ideas of how to change our body positivity, like how we're talking about our bodies, how people hear us talking about other people and ourselves? What are some good, even practical ways of beginning to do that? Especially if that's really difficult for people. Like, we talked a couple weeks ago. Like, our biggest critics are ourselves and the things we say to ourselves.
Yeah.
So how do we begin to do that, have more body positivity, and even in our families?
Yeah. That's a great question. I feel like so much of the focus when it comes to body is on appearance. If we can shift that to function. So if you think about, and back to the food idea of, like, thinking about how food makes you feel and how it helps your body function is a different mindset than, will this make me look good or not? Or will it impact my weight or appearance? Because really that's why we need food, is to nourish ourselves, to help our body function. And that's how we honor our bodies. So shifting the focus to be less about appearance can be really important. And then also when it comes to food, focusing on what your body needs more of to stay nourished versus what it needs less of. This is really, really important because we don't want to start a restrictive mindset that can lead to other problems. But focusing on what your body needs more of. So more fluid, more protein, more fiber can give you a more positive outlook on food and also that intention of like, okay, this is what I'm doing for my body. I'm nourishing it. I need more of these things. A lot of times when you eat more of something, it displaces other things that maybe you're already getting plenty of. So it helps to balance things out in that way too. And then again, focusing on what that food does for you. So not, again, labels, good or bad, healthy, unhealthy. Like, what is this food giving me? Is it giving me nutrients, vitamins, or minerals? Is it giving me energy? I always tell my clients, not every food is going to provide both. Sometimes there's, going to be foods that give you vitamins and minerals. And sometimes there's going to be those fun foods that provide fuel. Not every food has to provide everything you need. And honestly, not every food can. There's not even one food that can give you everything you need. So it's important to have that balance.
I did see a shake once on Instagram.
Oh, yeah.
Said it could provide everything I could ever need.
yeah.
I just need to one of the things I love in that framing that conversation around a relationship with food is, I mean, if someone comes to Jess for not a relationship with food, but a relationship with their spouse, they realize it's broken. They realize that they need to fix it. No matter what, just realizing it isn't going to get you. It takes work. It takes intentionality. It takes all of those things. And so I think oftentimes, like, we can realize we have an unhealthy relationship with food, but the hard work is, okay, now I realize it, and what work am I going to put in? What things am I no longer going to say to my spouse? In a marriage relationship. So if I'm trying to fix that, it just takes work. It takes intentionality. It takes failing and receiving grace again. It takes all of those things. And I think that's the thing that really resonated with me so much about using this language about food being that relationship, which I think is so good. One of the things I'm curious about, really quickly getting back to genetics, is, so I've got 3 daughters, right? And just knowing them, I have a 9-year-old daughter and I better get this right. I have a 10-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old daughter, and it's clear their body types are different. And they're growing up talking about that now. They're even realizing their body types are different. The 8-year-old's catching the 10-year-old in height, and she's in weight, and she's just larger, has a larger frame. So how do I start to, like, as a parent inside of that world, how do I start to speak? I mean, you're getting to the body positivity stuff. How do I start to speak in a healthy way about those? Or if my daughter starts to notice that and she notices things about her versus other kids at school, like, how do I start as a parent to shepherd my kids in that?
Right. That's hard because it's a physical, it's noticed first, right? A lot of times when it comes to that comparison, or even if, people are going to compare themselves. It's part of what happens. But helping them realize that they're more than that. They're more than a body. So there's going to be differences in their bodies, but there's also differences in their talents. There's differences in their skills or types of intelligences. They're different, and they're made different on purpose. Diversity is beautiful. Kind of helping them see that that's not the only thing about them, right?
Yeah.
And really not the most important thing about them or most interesting. You know what I mean? Who they are and what's underneath the surface is what's important. So I think it's really hard for kids, and then especially through adolescence, there's very much that more superficial focus, and there's a lot of pressures when it comes, to that age group. And so, some of it is normal just based on our culture, and just helping them to see that they're more than a body.
One thing that's been helpful for me with my kids, and I don't know what you think about this, is if they make a comment about their body or somebody else's body, or they notice skin color and they have a question or just anything, I always, and it has taken a lot of dedication for me, but every time I try to say, okay, what else do you notice about them? Or like, what's another detail that we like, you noticed that, but what else is really cool about them? Or like, did you like their shirt? Or like, there's just a lot of things that can come from that. Or like, oh, he's really strong. He's really strong because he loves to be outside and play. Like, just to add more meat onto a comment has been helpful for me.
Yeah. Awesome.
That's good. Let's talk about our unhealthy relationships with foods a little more, and then what those relationships look like, whether it's overeating or undereating. What are some examples that you can give us of a bad relationship with food?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I will say, I'm going to start out since we talked about dieting. And I got to say this, dieting is disordered eating. Okay. I'm not saying it's an eating disorder, but I think it's really important to acknowledge that dieting is not a form of normal eating. So that right there is kind of one unhealthy relationship with food.
So are you saying, just so we can clarify for people listening, what does that mean necessarily? Because I mean, our diet is what we eat, but if you were are you saying specifically chasing certain types of dieting, like fads and trends, or are you saying even just intentionally saying I'm going to eat differently can be disordered eating?
So when I say diets, that's a good clarifying question. So what I mean is usually diets are kind of restrictive in nature. So they're cutting things out. A lot of times large food groups or large amount of food. They're also labeling foods like we talked about as healthy, unhealthy, good, bad, like eat, don't eat kind of thing. So kind of putting foods on a forbidden food list, which can be really harmful. And yeah, certainly fad diets fall in that category. A lot of times it can not even necessarily be a specific diet, but a long list of rules or even a couple of rules that are really rigid. So essentially kind of restrictive, rule-based.
So like intermittent fasting maybe.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. There's a lot of them.
Okay.
They go
So
by
just
all different names, and the names are changing, I feel like.
But so what you would encourage is you shouldn't maybe change. I guess I'm trying to understand, like, if you wanted to live healthier, if you know I have high blood pressure, I'm pre-diabetic, I'm whatever that might be, like, what are those things that I should be changing that are important to change your diet, but not to be disordered, I guess.
Right. So focusing on more of what like you need. So, or maybe substitutions. Like if you do have a reason to limit your sodium intake or need to be cautious of it, I should say, certainly making substitutions, but not saying that I can never have, a certain food because it's high in sodium. It's it's finding that gentle balance. But yeah, I think it's important in any case, if you have a health reason to, or if you want to focus on your health and prioritize nutrition, that you get the education on what's best for you, and do that in a way that's not restrictive.
Gotcha. So the different types of unhealthy relationships are overeating, emotional eating, undereating or restrictive habits, binge eating, or like getting into cycles of shame where you feel really good about yourself for a while because you think you're eating only healthy foods, and then the moment you eat something that you would deem unhealthy, you live in a lot of shame. And so what are some insights you can give for us to kind of get past those, get through those, just establish healthy habits that are long lasting?
Yeah, I think I want to start with the overeating because I feel like there can be a lot of assumptions or shame associated with overeating and guilt. Overeating is very, very, it's much more complex. It's not usually someone's choice to overeat. There are different reasons for someone overeating. That's something I explore with my clients too. What different things could be contributing to causing this? And honestly, the leading cause of overeating is dieting. So restrictive, whether it's restrictive of like total energy or calories, that puts you at a deficit that makes your body actually increase hunger hormones and drive an obsession with food to eat and obsession with food and leads to overeating, or that restraint of like not eating certain foods makes them more desirable and leads people to overeat. And when they do have that chance, even if they're not hungry for that full amount. So the leading cause of overeating is dieting. It's just, again, another reason it's important to address that relationship with food. But it's also, it's important to understand if that's happening, what is going on. There's lots of different causes. So could be restrictive or restraint, could be certain emotional factors that need to be addressed, and there's actually quite a few different different reasons for that. So most of the time it's not someone's, it's not someone's intention, right, to overeat. It's something that happens. And most of the time they feel out of control, which is a very helpless, distressing feeling. And then that, followed by shame and guilt. So yes. And then under eating or restrictive habits, again, lots of variety of different reasons for this, but usually there's a mechanism or a underlying purpose. Not everyone knows why they're leading to those behaviors, but that certainly can be concerning. And whether that's, again, restricting total intake or restricting certain foods, either can be just as harmful.
Yeah.
And then, binge eating. I will say when it comes to binging, it's the most common eating disorder. It's also probably one of the most secretive. Most people aren't upfront about that they're dealing with that because there is a lot of shame involved, but it is the most common eating disorder. And it's a lot of times a natural consequence of restricting or a different mentality around food. But it is very common. And then the other one on here, I did want to mention orthorexia, which is a preoccupation with the health of, like, how the degree of health the food is providing. So sometimes, or having that preoccupation with, being healthy, which can lead to also like not getting the nutrition you need. If you're overly concerned with, eating healthy foods, sometimes that limits your food choices pretty severely and can lead people to not getting enough nutrition, along with other challenges socially and emotionally. But
when you say binge eating, just so like what classifies, like how does it go from, I just ate a bunch today to like actually binge eating, to be able to name that as like a disorder or one of the most popular things?
So the DSM-5, which kind of identifies diagnosis, I guess, when mental health diagnosis, it classifies it as eating a larger amount than normal in a shorter amount of time.
Okay.
But I think that, honestly, I usually define it differently for clients, just to help them understand, because they may eat an amount that is very distressing to them that they didn't feel they could stop. And so if they have that element of feeling out of control, regardless of how much it was, I consider that a binge.
Okay.
It helps validate them, like, okay, this was really distressing. I didn't intend for this to happen. And maybe it was not that much over, but I classify that as a binge. So it doesn't look the same for everyone.
Yeah. Well, because I think we live in a, like, all you can eat, I'm going to the buffet, man. I binged definitely at Texas State Brazil, a few weeks ago. So like, I just was curious, like what that looks like what that classification was. And so I think that's helpful. And then like how often, like if it's like, Thanksgiving, does everybody binge on Thanksgiving? It's kind of one of those celebrated days that like,
or are we misusing that word?
Yeah,
how you're
in that kind
how
of
you're saying it.
I might consider that more overeating. Again, if that's mindful, like if it's a choice to eat more than you're hungry for and a little bit past comfortable, like that's different than eating and not being able to stop.
Okay, that's helpful. That's really helpful.
How do you see in your profession and just experience how these behaviors have developed and manifest? How does that happen in a person's life? Does it come from trauma? Does everything start like in childhood and now we're adults processing this, or
right?
What do you see?
A lot of times it's kind of undercover in the beginning, like it's not noticed, especially in our culture with like just dieting kind of being normalized. Like 30% of chronic dieters will develop an eating disorder. I should check my facts on that, but I believe that's accurate. So that is kind of a gateway, but there are multiple different factors that contribute to someone developing an eating disorder, and actually genetics is a large part of that. It's a big influence, but certainly like social factors, personality types. There's lots of different variables, but typically it kind of starts out kind of gradual a lot of times and kind of undercover. And eating disorders, I think of eating disorders as a kind of a broad umbrella where there's different subtypes, but honestly, it's disordered eating. So they can kind of morph and change. It can start out restrictive, then lead to binging, then, like it can change over time. There isn't.
It's not like there's not a prescriptive way that it develops.
No.
It could be like words spoken over somebody and how you process that, or.
Yeah, it's different. It really is different for everyone. Certainly, like you mentioned, trauma or different significant events can kind of sometimes be a trigger, but it is a little bit different for everyone. So, yeah, during adolescence, that's a higher percentage of onset. So that's more common to start like adolescence through early 20s, but it can be developed later in life too. So
I think where things really get uncomfortable in this conversation is, okay, it's easy to say I identify my friends are having a bad marriage, and so at some point I need to, say, hey, dude, I can see the relationship with your wife is not healthy right now, and like, how do I? And that's even uncomfortable. You got to have the right friendship and all that for it. But when it comes to our relationship with food, like, how do we start to approach in a space where we are maybe noticing or seeing someone's weight fluctuate, or we're seeing them be restrictive, or maybe we're seeing some of these signs, and maybe you could give us some of those signs to watch for. How do we start to, in a loving place, like I'm stewarding my kids' lives right now still and helping them shape. How do I start to have those conversations when it seems maybe I'm seeing that there's an unhealthy relationship with food being developed in somebody's life? I think that's where, man, I just tense up and I'm like, I don't want to have that conversation with anybody because there's so many fireworks that could go off. There's so much shame that I could be overlaying in their life. It's just difficult because we have to eat every day. It's just a necessary part of our lives. And so how do we start to enter into those spaces if we notice somebody and we're feeling like maybe there's an unhealthy relationship with food happening?
Yeah, I think that's a hard one. Mm-hmm. That is. Mostly because my first thought is like what someone eats or their relationship with food is no one else's business. So I'm like, I don't know that that's anything that you would step in on, especially if you're not an expert. You know what I mean? Like it might be where you leave an open door and saying like, if you approach the subject of nutrition and see if they want to engage, I don't know. But the other thing is you really don't know what's going on with their relationship with food or health by looking at them. So it's so hard it almost feels like saying something would somewhat be a judgment in a sense. You know what I mean? Like, so I personally would stay out of it. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if that's everyone's opinion. The exception would be if you're concerned for their safety. Like if they, again, you can't know if someone's at like health risk by looking at that always. But this comes most into play if it's like a child of yours, like you're responsible for their health and safety. And so as a parent, yes, you have to step in. As a friend, that's tough. Mm-hmm. I might, again, open the door and just see if they want to talk about it or want help, and maybe if they do, find some resources for them to talk to. But yeah, if it's a child relationship and you notice anything that is concerning, you need to step in and get them professional help.
What about if it's a child that you notice and their parents don't care about that aspect of their life, right? And so you're like, man, I see a kid or I know somebody and their parents they're not taking that responsibility in their life. Like, is there any kind of ways you should have those conversations or people you have to call? Like I know if I hear abuse is happening or whatever, like we're self-reporters. And so I guess where's that balance or that line there where you're like, man, this kid is just totally not being cared for in this sort of way.
Right. In that case, I'd certainly make sure to talk to the parents first. And sometimes parents aren't aware, honestly, or it's changed so gradually. I feel like sometimes it's harder to see when it's right in front of you which is maybe seems hard to believe, but I see it a lot. And then, parents will beat themselves up about it. But a lot of times they need someone to say something to maybe validate their question mark in the back of their mind. So definitely talking to the parents first. And if they dismiss it and aren't concerned, depends on the age of the child. I would say if they're here's the thing when it comes to eating disorders, not especially children and adolescents, a lot of times don't seek help on their own. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it really does. But we have had circumstances where, if the child's at a risk and their parents aren't supporting them in their eating disorder, we've had to call CPS for that sort of thing. So if it's a case like that, that would be
extreme.
That's more an extreme, but it might be appropriate.
Yeah. I think it just points to this is all so complex. And we end up here on our podcast so often where people come in with it's black or it's white, it's clear. And I think especially when you talk about physical health, you're like, I can see it. I can see if somebody's healthy or not healthy. We convince ourselves of that. And then we just get mad when we're like, there's so much nuance to this. There's so much more beyond what we can see, what a scale says, what, the things that are the most obvious. And we want the easy answer. We want there to be, no, give me the answer. Come on. What are you doing? Just tell me how to do it. And because that's a more comfortable place to live. And it's more uncomfortable to realize we have to live in the nuance and we have to extend more grace. And we need to realize there's so much more complexity going on behind the scenes than our assumptions are leading to. And so I think it's helpful to acknowledge that. And it seems like we end up there so many times with so many topics on this podcast.
Right.
I also think we just need, just me as, red flags go up when we have these conversations too, because I'm like, this is very uncomfortable. And these are the conversations that we commit to having. These are things that you might talk with your spouse behind closed doors, but we're talking about it openly. But I mean, this can lead to a lot of defensiveness. I mean, even having these conversations, this risks relationship with people. And so to me, it's okay, even as you guys are talking, I'm like, wow, I even had my own personal experience with this. My son had a tethered spinal cord, and that affected his metabolism where he gained 40 pounds in a year. And nobody knew why. Mm-hmm. But if somebody had come up to me and said wow, your kid is really chunky, what are you feeding him? Yeah. I would have been like, you have no idea what's going on behind closed doors and the medical things that are involved, because you never stopped to ask me personally, what's going on in my life. Yeah. And so if somebody were to come up and just to not have that relational equity with me, to make a comment about my kid's body, but not have the investment of what's going on in our family's life. I really think we need to think about that too, because this is a really uncomfortable space that we move into, kind of taboo because we don't know all what's going on. But just because you have the confidence to say something and you think that you have all that education, maybe that you don't have, that Krista has, we need to be careful with that and really steward, as much as we're stewarding this idea well, we need to steward those conversations well.
Well, and it's like so many things. I think if someone hasn't gone through something on their own, or they haven't experienced a struggle in this area, then it's much easier for them to take a position of judgment, because they're like, well, obviously you're doing it wrong. I've never had to think about this a day in my life. Yeah. So you're intentionally doing this, or whatever conclusion they're going to come to because of their position or their experience in life.
For sure.
As we kind of start to wrap this up, what are some practical steps that people can take away from this? If they're, hey, you know what, I'm hearing you, but I want to be healthier. I do want to, you know what I mean? I don't want to get into disordered eating, but what are some healthy habits I can, start to adopt from this? Or maybe even some just small changes, whether that's physical, spiritual, mental, to implement moving forward.
There's all kinds of things. Yeah. A lot of times it depends on the individual and where they're at. So certainly a dietitian could help. Okay. Meeting with someone to kind of help guide you on your nutrition needs, but also steps on getting there and practical resources to be able to implement it. But I would say starting with evaluating your relationship with food, and specifically how diet culture or diet mentality is, if it's impacting you in any way.
Yeah.
So, like, if there are food rules, honestly, kind of identifying them, and then practice, like, so it's easy for me to say, but again, people may be like, what does that mean? Like, allowing yourself to eat all foods. But I would say practical strategies, maybe like learning, if you don't know how to like grocery shop, meal plan, cooking, learning some of those basic skills that are necessary for, health. So learning some of the skills you need and kind of practicing implementing those things could be a good place to start. You could also, again, if there's identify some foods or food groups that your body needs more of, whether it be fiber or, vegetables, fruits, dairy, protein, like identify something that, I could work on getting more of this in my, in my life. That could be something. And kind of, again, a dietitian can help you kind of find ways to incorporate that and that kind of thing. But, again, focusing on making sure you have the skills, your relationship with food is neutral, which again can take time. And then, focusing on what you can get more of.
Yeah, that's good. Anything else? Anything else anybody wants to add before we wrap things up? Anything you feel like
about
you
lunchtime?
missed?
So
Yeah.
should wrap it up.
Because I think there's a lot to chew on. Excuse the pun, but I do think. There's a lot of things I've heard today that even challenge my mindset about what a healthy lifestyle looks like. So I think it's really helpful, and a lot of things that people can work on. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with people before we close?
Or how they can get resources or get a hold of you or anything like that. If people have got things going on, then any of that.
Yeah. So at Life Cycle Nutrition, my group practice, there's a handful of us dietitians that we have a variety of different specialties. So whatever your health concern or nutrition, like health goals are, there's someone that can help. So you can learn more on our websites, lcnutritionomaha.com.
Okay.
And just so you know, insurance does cover nutrition counseling. So usually it's like at no cost. So that's something we also specialize in.
That's
but
helpful.
There's someone there that can help you from a like grace-filled, non-judgmental perspective. And we are certainly weight inclusive. And we'd love to help.
Awesome. All right. Well, Krista, thank you for your time today. Really appreciate it. The insights you brought, really helpful. And again, another nuanced topic we've discovered. Really great. If anyone's listening and you have any questions or concerns you'd like to reach out to, you can do that on Instagram or TikTok. You can reach out to us at CCC OMA Podcast. You can send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org or leave us a voicemail at 402-885-9930. We'd love to hear from you there. But until next time, we'll talk to you then.